Hello, everybody, and finally, welcome back to our podcast. My name is Chris,
And my name is James.
and we're the Formula One Bros.
Just two twins with a love of F1 to share our thoughts on everything in the world of Formula One.
Yeah, and it is so good to be back. We took a weekend off from the British Grand Prix, so no British Grand Prix review episode. And as you can tell, we are both in new environments. We have new backgrounds because we've both moved into new places.
Yes, Chris and Brittany moved into an apartment, and I have finally been able to move into my new condo that I bought. So this week, these past 2 weeks really have been crazy with us moving again and all this craziness, and with all the 4th of July festivities happening. It's been a crazy few weeks, but we are back and ready to talk about the amazing race that we had in Austria. Oh my gosh, it was such a good race. So let's get that started.
Yeah, just general reactions about the race. It was so good. And I think
it was great.
I think Austria in general has always produced great racing because it is a really great overtaking track. There are tons of places to overtake. You know, in the middle sector, you can stay side by side, you know, through turns 5, 6, 7, and 8 and make it work. And, you know, there's 3 DRS zones, and, you know, it's always been a great track for overtaking. But, you know, with the new regulations, it was just incredible. And I think that just kind of goes into our first major takeaway, is that we had battles all throughout the field, whether it was the sprint race or the Grand Prix, between all teams. There were at some points 5 constructors battling for one position.
Yeah.
Like, we just have not seen that in Formula One in a very long time.
Very long time.
And it was amazing to see.
Yeah, I would venture to say I would step out of a limb. Well, I'm not really stepping out of a limb to say this, but I think Austria was the best race that we've had all season.
For sure.
From top to bottom, everything that we've seen throughout the entire weekend, because the weekend was pretty unpredictable with qualifying, the sprint race, everything. So I think this was definitely the best race weekend that we have seen all season long, which is super awesome because this race was directly at the halfway point of the season. A big takeaway that I have, being the Ferrari fan, I got to talk about Ferrari. Ferrari looked like they were undoubtedly the quickest team this weekend, but they still are super unreliable with their power unit. I would say Ferrari is the quickest power unit, but also the least reliable power unit.
Yeah.
Because throughout the entire season, the Ferrari engines, and this goes for all the Ferrari powered teams, have been taken a huge step forward this season. But we've seen so many retirements from those teams.
Yeah.
And so I think Ferrari is definitely the quickest power unit, but definitely the least reliable.
Yeah. And for sure on race pace too. And I think just in general, so a characteristic that I've noticed with, you know, when you look at the Ferraris compared to the Red Bulls, Ferraris are definitely much more front end limited, and the Red Bulls are much more rear end limited circuits. So on tracks that have high rear end deg, the Ferraris are going to be better able to maintain. And when the Red Bull were at tracks that have higher front end deg, the Red Bulls are going to be faster. Like you look at Bahrain, right? Ferrari was undoubtedly quicker, but that's because it was a very rear limited circuit.
Yeah.
And same with Austria. But when you look at tracks like Spain, Great Britain, you know, all the tracks kind of in the meat of this season so far have all been very front end limited, which has hampered the Ferraris. Yeah. And just kind of going on to the power unit struggles that Ferrari still seem to be having. And I know we all saw the images of Carlos's car. It purely exploded in a very spectacular way. And another a part of me is wondering if this is going beyond upgrade, like a bad batch of parts for upgrade. We know, going back to preseason testing, that Ferrari have this new combustion technology that has made their power unit so much more spectacular, especially compared to last year's. I'm almost wondering if they're still trying to kind of get a handle on all of that, and they're still trying to understand that technology. So when they bring upgrades, they don't really fully understand how it reacts when the whole unit is assembled together. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. In which case, once they sort out those problems and they really, take a deep dive in learning what that power unit is capable of, may not be this year, may not be next year, but they will know how to unlock it, and they'll be a force to be reckoned with. But yeah, definitely Ferrari looked like they had the edge on Red Bull this race.
Yeah, for sure. That's my biggest takeaway from the race.
Yeah. My next one is that finally, Mick Schumacher has arrived. And I say this, I wanted to say this after Great Britain, after the British Grand Prix, but I wasn't convinced yet. And I think, back-to-back performances like the way that he's had, and we're going to another track coming up in 2 weeks that will likely favor the Haas, being Paul Ricard in France. I think Mick has finally gotten to the point where he has arrived, and we know this about him, that it's his second year in a series before he really starts to come to life. You saw that in F3, second year he won the championship. We saw that in F2. It took until Hungary, his second year in F2, to once he got that win, the floodgates opened and nobody could catch him, and he won the championship very handily that season. And last year he didn't really have a teammate to a benchmark to learn from. So I'd almost say that this is almost kind of a second rookie season for him, because he's now learning from Kevin Magnussen, who we know is so
very experienced. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we've gotten to a point where finally we're seeing Mick's fullest potential. I think a lot of the pressure is easing off of him, and now we just get to enjoy watching him race.
He has entered his reputation era for all the Swifties.
Yeah. And
he's entering his reputation era.
And that is backed up by, in the sprint race, he was, I'm faster than Kevin. Please let me by. I'm faster than Kevin. And he looked like his dad, like storming down the paddock in Belgium.
And like trying to find David Coulthard. Yeah.
Trying to find David Coulthard. He, like, the same look that Michael had on his face in there is the same look that he had in the media pen after the sprint race. He was not happy. But speaking of,
he's definitely got a lot of his dad inside of him.
Yeah. But speaking of that moment, his defense on Lewis Hamilton, the 7-time world champ Lewis Hamilton, was unreal. And that is not any sort of driving that we've seen from him at all yet. And he had a great battle with Max at the end of the British Grand Prix. So I think it's fair to say that Mick has arrived.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I'd like to add a takeaway. This weekend, it's clear, kind of going in the opposite direction. AlphaTauri has been definitely, it's very obvious that they have not been keeping up the pace with development from the teams around them, which is really unfortunate to see, because I think Yuki Tsunoda and Pierre Gasly are a very, very strong driver pairing. We've seen how talented Pierre Gasly is in the past with what he's done at previously Toro Rosso, now AlphaTauri, all that he's done there. And the last season and the start of this season were really, really strong, but that team has just not been able to keep up with the development of what the others have been doing. So we've seen them kind of slip down the grid. And this weekend, it was definitely obvious that had been the case.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and you look at the race results, Pierre Gasly 15th, Yuki Tsunoda 16th. They only finished on the road. They only finished ahead of Sebastian Vettel, who ended up last on the road. And then 18th, 19th, and 20th was Carlos Sainz, Nicholas Latifi, and Sergio Perez, who all DNF'd.
All retired. Yeah.
So yeah, a really not great weekend, a very difficult weekend for them. And this is also coming from, their development teams. they've said, whether it's been Franz Tost or any of their engineers, they've said that they have not been keeping up, and the whole first half of the season so far has been about just understanding their car and how to best optimize it. And maybe they've learned how to best optimize it, but the development race this season has been astronomical, and they've just fallen behind. I think them and Aston Martin have just completely fallen behind.
Yeah.
The next thing that I want to talk about is, we saw problems, Ferrari continue to have with their reliability and Carlos Sainz, but, the fact that, Sergio Perez ended up off the track, and why we'll get into a minute. But he didn't end up, I have it in front of me. He ended up finishing dead last with a DNF. He was, with all of that, I think with both teams still having problems, these two championships are wide open. And the drivers' championship is only 38 points. It'll take one DNF from Max Verstappen and a win from Charles Leclerc for him to be right back in it, and it'll take a double DNF from either team to just completely turn the championship on its head. So I really do think that, we're halfway through the season, but we're not doing 16, 18 races anymore. So this championship is definitely still wide open.
Yeah. And my last takeaway that I have, and something that I think we both wanted to mention, is the harassment and abuse that quite a few fans were experiencing at this race weekend. And I'm just going to say Sebastian Vettel said it best, that if you're going to behave like that, you deserve a lifetime ban from going to any F1 race. That type of behavior is completely unacceptable. I agree with the condemnation from the teams in F1 and the FIA. However, whether something will be done about that, I have no idea. But if you are a fan of F1 and you are going to a track spouting off, sexist remarks to female F1 fans, racist remarks, like any form of physical or verbal abuse, you do not deserve to be at the racetrack. This is a beautiful sport for anyone to enjoy. No matter where in the world you are, it is a global sport. And I think we all deserve to enjoy it. However we choose to enjoy it. But if your choice to enjoy the sport starts to hinder someone else enjoying it, you need to take a step back and reassess how you're enjoying the sport. And that will go into what my hot take is later, about, I won't spoil what my hot take is, but that kind of ties into what my hot take is later in the episode. But yeah, I definitely wanted to say that it's disgusting behavior. And if you think that is any form or any sense of the word, acceptable, if you think that is acceptable in any way, you need to take a step back and reassess your fandom of the sport.
Yeah, I totally agree there. I'm going to also turn this back on the FIA, and I posted a tweet about this, with the racist comments that, I tweet something along the lines every time Lewis Hamilton, has, something has been said about him, like with Nelson Piquet, and when people were saying the same things about Naomi Schiff, I'm going to say the same thing here, is that all of these condemnation statements from the F1 and FIA are good because it's bringing attention to that behavior, which is necessary. But we've seen time and time again where we condemn this behavior and then nothing changes, and it continues to happen. This continues to happen, and I know Lewis Hamilton talks a lot about, we need to shift, the mindset, which is very true, but that mindset is not going to be shifted as long as that behavior is allowed to take place. So it is getting to the point where F1 and the FIA need to do something, whether it's bolstering their tip lines. I know we have this at the university that we went to here in the States, big college football school. At every game, there's a tip line that you can text if an unruly fan is making you uncomfortable. You can text that tip line and security will come to you and remove them from the event. I know it's much harder to police that sort of thing on the scale of Formula One races compared to college football, but you need to bolster up security, do something, because these people need to be found, and these people need to never be allowed back into Formula One ever again. Because and that might sound a little bit dramatic, but honestly, this is happening for so long that I'm tired of it. I'm really tired of that being the focus of some Grand Prix weekends, especially involving, women in the sport, W Series or Lewis Hamilton, Naomi Schiff, those sorts of things. So, and I'm not gonna point at any specific driver's fan base, because there was one specific driver whose fan base was there in force. And I'm not going to point at any specific driver's fan base, because I think everybody needs to take a step back and evaluate the way that they treat others and the way that they behave at Formula One events. Now for something completely different. The last thing that I just kind of want to mention is very briefly is, the whole rift between the FIA and the drivers, specifically surrounding track limits and the way that was policed this weekend. Here's a crazy stat for you. 47 laps throughout the weekend were deleted from track limits, which is just about half a Grand Prix distance for the Austrian Grand Prix, half a Grand Prix distance. And that is very, very different from other stewarding we've had, other marshaling we've had at other races. And so it's not just about track limits. It's about the fact that the stewarding is so inconsistent, race to race. And that's a little bit by design, because to take the impartiality out of the sport, we have 2 rotating race directors, and we have a series of rotating groups of marshals. So the whole armada of FIA officials at every event marshaling the race is different. That's by design a little bit, to take any partial bias out of it. But now we're getting into a situation where it's so inconsistent that you have drivers like Sebastian Vettel literally walking out of drivers' briefings. And I'm not going to say his exact quote because it contains foul language, but he was very unhappy, and he was fined for it. So and it has nothing to do with the drivers. It has nothing to do with they are doing what they can within the guidelines that they're given. And the FIA just has no control over that right now. So those are the last of our takeaways from the Austrian Grand Prix.
Yeah. Overall, really exciting race, really exciting weekend. So speaking of the weekend, we are going to now get into our weekly top 10. As always, anything goes. There are no rules. We've had all sorts of different types of things in the weekly top 10. However, this week it is just drivers. Yeah, it's actually just drivers in the weekly top 10 this week. So kicking it off in 10th place, we have Mr. Valtteri Bottas. He started the race in 20th.
19th. Because Fernando Alonso was
Fernando. He started the race in 19th. Granted, he didn't finish in the points, but he did get all the way up to 11th. So he gained 8 places during the race.
He would have finished in the points had it not been for a last couple lap pass by Fernando, a last minute pass by Fernando Alonso to nab that last point.
Yeah. So he ran a really, really great race this week in Austria. And so he gets our 10th spot.
Yeah. Great race from him. Before we move on to a number 9, we have to say that it was such a great race and it was so competitive that it was so hard to place anybody in this top 10.
Yeah, it was very difficult because we were like, oh man, like this whole top 5, really, it was just like, well, they all did so great. How do we? So,
and in very
some
different
drivers,
ways, yeah.
You all may think that some drivers are lower than what you think. If you disagree with our weekly top 10, leave a comment down below and tell us where you would have put certain drivers. So please let us know. Going on to 9th place, we have Mr. Sergio Perez.
Yeah, Checo. I mean, it's hard to put him higher. He didn't have the cleanest qualifying. All of his Q3 lap times were deleted, which meant he started the sprint race in 13th, made his way all the way up, and gained some points from the sprint race. So he made it all the way up to the top 8, was running really well, was running in 4th until he was, unfortunately, had a collision with George Russell, which George Russell ended up getting a time penalty for. But he was unable to continue, and ended up out of the race, which I think is to no fault of his own. Very, very valid move on the outside of George Russell there, which is at turn 4, which is a turn that Mercedes like to punt Red Bulls off the track. But just no fault of his own, ended up, but didn't have the cleanest weekend. I also think it's important to talk when we talk about Sergio Perez. Actually, you know what? I'll get to that later. We should move on to P8.
All right. In 8th place, we have Mr. Lando Norris, who ironically also finished 8th. He had a really, just like from the beginning of the onset of the weekend in FP1, was really struggling. But he ran a really great race, and he even posted on his social media saying that, like, after where they had started the weekend in FP1, finishing 8th place was really encouraging. So props to him for doing a good job recovering from the start of the weekend.
Yeah. Lando is always just somebody. I think we've all come to know this about Lando, but he's just a driver that you always kind of expect him to be there or thereabouts.
Mm-hmm.
He's always in the conversation. He's always in the mix, because he's just that good. He's that talented. He's that consistent. Great drive from him. Moving on to P7 is Esteban Ocon.
Yeah, Esteban Ocon. He again ran really. It wasn't that he like gained a lot of positions or did anything crazy. He's just very consistent throughout this weekend. Very consistent. Very solid weekend. Very encouraging for him. And so that's why we have him in P7.
Yeah, started the race P6, ended up P5. Just had a really good race. He's, I think we've talked about this when we talk about Alpine. We've talked about this several times, especially at the end of last season. We talked about it a lot, just how Alpine, with Fernando and Esteban, they just make a really good team. Mm-hmm. And when one of them's not there, the other one is. When Esteban Ocon is off of it, Fernando's right there. And when Fernando's off of it, like this weekend, wasn't able to start the sprint race, started the race P20. Esteban he drove a really consistent race, and consistency is what wins championships. Obviously, Esteban Ocon's not going to win the championship. Alpine is not going to win the championship anytime soon, but that consistency is important. And, and we say this time and time again that Alpine is turning into the stars of the midfield. And it's drives like that from Esteban that are very quiet, but just very consistent.
Yeah. Yep. All right. And so we are going to move on to 6th place. And this is kind of where it starts to get a little bit difficult. In 6th place, we have Carlos Sainz. Now, he had a fantastic weekend all weekend long, and it was actually looking like that he was going to finish 2nd with a Ferrari 1-2. Unfortunately, we have him in 6th, and it's no fault to his own, but his car did blow up and wasn't able to finish the race. But yeah, again, another performance that was very consistent. It's just,
yeah. I think, and that's to no fault of his own. I think the reason why I score him a little bit lower is just, he's a Grand Prix winner now. He's gotten to the point where, he can, we know what he's capable of. And he just wasn't quite on Charles's pace this weekend. And Charles looked handily the most dominant person, one of the two most dominant people this weekend. But yeah, and he was on track to finish second. I think he was literally like going to the inside towards turn 4, like down the back straight towards turn 4. He was literally pulling out to make a move on Max Verstappen when his engine literally exploded. So really unfortunate for him, some more bad luck. And unfortunately, the bad luck for him continues. For Carlos, moving on to P5 is Sir Lewis Hamilton.
Yep. Another great weekend for him. After crashing out of qualifying, starting P10, going through the sprint race and then finishing third place for the race. Really, really, really fantastic. Mm-hmm. And this is kind of where you'll see, yes, Lewis, we're not saying Lewis didn't because he's only 5th place, but this top 5 really was tough. But Lewis Hamilton, fantastic race weekend for him, finishing on the podium. It's always nice to see when Lewis is happy and is being successful. So this was one of those weekends where he seemed to be in his element. And at times, he was the quickest driver on the track.
Yeah. And I think, all the way up until his crash and his first run in Q3, he was a threat for pole.
Yeah.
Like he was in the mix for pole position, which at the beginning of the season, if you had said that a Mercedes was fighting for pole position, I would have thought you were crazy. Mm-hmm. But Lewis is just that good that he can take that car, that W13, and be a threat for pole. But yeah, and I think had he not crashed, he would have 100% been in that conversation. And can I just say that it is so refreshing that we are now having another team in that conversation when we turn up to a Grand Prix weekend. Mm-hmm. Like Mercedes, Red Bull, and Ferrari, the big 3, like they have been for so many years. It is so nice that we have no idea who's going to be fastest when we turn up for a Grand Prix weekend now. I think, I think for Mercedes, I think for Mercedes are still a little bit track specific, but it's so good to see. And considering he started 10th, ended up on the podium, just gave a classic Lewis Hamilton come from behind to do the job and get the job done.
Yep. Yeah. Really great weekend for him. In 4th place, we have Mr. Max Verstappen. He was very consistent. Again, super consistent all weekend. Started on pole, dominated the sprint race. However, the reason why we have the top 3 above him is because he definitely looked outdriven during the race. Definitely was outdriven by both Ferraris during the race.
For sure.
But still finishing second, which had Carlos's engine not blown up, I think that would have been no, that's a lie. But he would have finished 3rd place. Yeah. But still super, super good weekend for him. And I'm sure he should be very happy with finishing second.
Yeah. And it's just unfortunate that, we ended up in conditions on track that led to the Red Bulls not being able to maintain their tires as much as good as the Ferraris and the Mercedes. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of what led. It was a little bit cooler. It was windier on those on race day. So I think that contributed to that a little bit, but yeah, just didn't quite have the pace of the Ferrari. And I think everybody is confused as to why Ferrari is the quickest. I actually saw something really funny. There was a tweet that was with every team trying to copy Red Bull and Ferrari is still the fastest is the most confusing thing ever. Like nobody knows why the Ferraris are actually as fast as they are. And I think that's just that's a little bit of a tangent, but I think that is just the funniest thing that I saw this weekend. But yeah, a solid 4th place for Max Verstappen.
Yeah, really, really good race. In 3rd place, we have Mr. Fernando Alonso. Started dead last, was not able to compete in the sprint race, started dead last, and he finished 10th. Definitely showed that the old fox still has it, still has his mojo. Definitely showing that he earned those 2 championships this weekend. So
for sure.
He nothing more to say than that. He just ran a phenomenal race.
Yeah.
Finishing in the points, starting from dead last. So
yeah, Fernando, unreal drive. And we know this about him. He's just always there. Coming in 2nd place, your Austrian Grand Prix driver of the day, Mick Schumacher. We've already talked about him a little bit, about how he is back, and it's not just that he got driver of the day. It's not just because he's a Schumacher. Genuinely, he got his elbows out this weekend in a way that we have not seen yet this season. Put in a brilliant race. And we saw flashes of this in Canada, like at the very beginning before the power unit imploded on him. He was in P6, P7, very consistent, same sort of thing in Great Britain. And now he's had a 3rd really good weekend with Haas. And he 100% the drive. And I think that's, he gave a really consistent drive in the Grand Prix. He was faster than Kevin Magnussen in the Grand Prix, but that's also because of his defense against Lewis Hamilton, which was ultimately didn't bear any fruit. But the defense, the multi-lap defense that he put on was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. And it's a Schumacher Hamilton battle that unfortunately we never really got with his dad, between Michael and Lewis, but that was really cool to see. And he got his elbows out, and
his dad would be proud.
Very much so.
So in 1st place, we have your Austrian Grand Prix race winner, Charles Leclerc. And wow, what a weekend for him. Just super consistent all weekend. He said at the end of the sprint race, we'll get him tomorrow. And boy, did he.
Yeah.
And not only did he win, but he was suffering with throttle issues towards the end of the race. Some in those slower corners, he mentioned that he still had 30 to 40% throttle on during those, and like having to do some weird things with the pedals towards the end. And he was very much freaking out in the car. I'm sure we all would have been freaking out, but yes, what a fantastic race for him. Awesome to see after string of bad luck in the last 5 races, he is finally back on the top step where he honestly rightfully deserves to be.
Yeah. And I say, his first place performance for me is not just about the race, but it's the whole weekend. He was in a very crucial point of the season for Ferrari right now. Every single session, him and Max were trading fastest laps.
Yeah.
Qualifying, sprint race, the race, free practice 1, free practice 2, every session, him and Max Verstappen were trading fastest laps. And you're very right. After the sprint race, he said, we'll get him tomorrow. We know that we have the pace. And that's because at the sprint race, he was taking, a couple tenths out of Max Verstappen per lap. On the last 5 or 6 laps of the sprint race, he was catching Max Verstappen very quickly. So, just another really good performance from him. And it is finally, I'm almost wondering if there's a little bit of pressure off of his shoulders, because before this weekend, he has never, ever won a Grand Prix from anywhere other than pole position. And he finally won a race from not pole position. And so I think it's not really as talked about, because I think him and Max Verstappen are so close, and I think Ferrari has had some bad luck. And so I think the narrative around that is a little bit different, but it reminds me a little bit of that Mick Schumacher. He gets the points, the pressure's off, the floodgates open. And, ever since 2019, that was always one of his biggest Achilles heel is he's really fast in qualifying, but he can't win from anywhere outside pole. So I'm hoping that is something that's kind of a little bit of pressure eased off of his shoulders, but time will tell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with that, we are going to go into our next segment of biggest winners and biggest losers. We are going to start with our biggest losers first. Mm-hmm. And I have two I would like to throw in the ring. One, Sergio Perez. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately was punted off the racetrack, which we talked about that earlier, so I don't really need to mention it. As well as Aston Martin. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about Aston Martin. I mean, with Seb finishing dead last on the road, he technically didn't finish dead last because there were 3 drivers that DNF'd, but of the drivers that finished the race, he finished last. I'm not sure where Lance Stroll finished, but it was definitely not in the points. 13th. Yeah. So yeah, not great. Yeah, it's just Aston Martin is having a really rough season, and it seems like there's no end in sight.
Yeah. I think they're in the same boat as AlphaTauri in that they are just kind of falling behind the development war a little bit, which is unfortunate to see. Sebastian Vettel is a caliber of driver that definitely deserves a better car than what Aston Martin is giving him right now. Yeah, it's just really unfortunate to see. I did want to circle back to Sergio Perez because I said I would talk about it, and I want to talk about it. The incident between him and George Russell. I think there was a lot of debate like, when you're going around the outside and, you make a collision, that's, a racing incident or, Sergio Perez, cut in too close and it's ultimately Perez's fault for not leaving enough room. I don't think so. Sergio Perez left plenty of room. And I think the 5-second penalty for George Russell was 100% deserved there. I mean, and that's a classic situation that we've seen in the past when it comes to Brazil in 2019, Austria in 2020. When in that situation where the outside driver is coming in and is tagged in the right rear corner, that's a penalty for the driver that's on the inside. So especially considering when you're going into the corner and you're ahead, or right alongside, like there's no reason why you should be shoving somebody out on the track. And that's going to go into my hot take a little bit about driving standards. But yeah, definitely, especially in a weekend where he looked really, really quick. I think he's starting to lag behind a little bit, Max Verstappen, in the development direction that Red Bull is going in. So I think not only just because he didn't end up finishing the race, didn't end up getting points, but I think also too, I think he's starting to fall back behind Max Verstappen a little bit. So these next few races will be crucial for Sergio in staying in the championship hunt.
Yep.
The last person that I want to talk about is someone that I feel so bad, but we have to go and, we're going back to Daniel Ricciardo's sympathy corner a little bit, just his woes at McLaren continue. And I know we talk about this almost every week, and it's really hard because outside of Ferrari, I'm a Ferrari fan through and through. Anybody that drives Ferrari is my favorite driver, but outside of that, Daniel Ricciardo, easily one of my favorite drivers on the grid. And I think everybody can say that, even if you're not a McLaren fan, you're a Daniel Ricciardo fan. And it's really, really hard to see him go through what he's going. But there's just something about that McLaren that he just can't get a handle on. And it's getting to the point where if he does end up out of McLaren, I think he'll be out of F1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. All right. Well, let's move on to our biggest winners of the week. And I have 2 I'd like to throw in. The first one, us, the fans. We were treated to such a fantastic race to watch. It was absolutely amazing to watch. Such a good race. Best one of the season. Yeah. And I think we can put the Formula One Bros stamp of approval on that race. Yes. With that being the best weekend that we've seen all season. We were in for a real treat. We were in for a real treat. The other one I'd like to throw in is Haas. All aboard the Haas hype train.
Yes.
They had a stellar weekend with Mick, especially had a fantastic weekend. I've already talked about Mick, but also Kevin Magnussen being right there in 7th place. So yeah, absolutely amazing weekend for Haas. They're definitely, I would say, probably one of the biggest winners of the week.
Yeah, and they've had a couple really good weekends now. Canada was a good weekend for them, at least on pay in terms of pace. Great Britain, the British Grand Prix was a great weekend for them, and now another one. So I know you said all aboard the Haas hype train, but honestly, the hype train has left the station, and if you're not on it, what are you doing at this point?
Yeah.
And I think they're finally getting back to the form that they had circa 2018, when Roman Grosjean turned up and finished 4th in the Austrian Grand Prix. Yeah, or was it Austria or Belgium? I can't really remember. But Roman Grosjean and Kevin Magnussen had some great races in 2018. It was a fantastic season for them, 5th in the Constructors' Championship. So yeah, I mean, it's just all in all, I think they're finally getting their form back. Of course, it helps that Kevin Magnussen is there, an experienced driver that knows his way around the team. Mm-hmm. He knows his way around the car. He's obviously very experienced, so can give really good feedback. So their development direction is going in a really positive way. So all in all, Haas is on a great trajectory right now, and I hope it continues for them because they're such a great addition to the grid.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that just because we're American. Haas is a great team. All in all, Haas is a great team. And if you don't agree, I'm sorry. Your loss.
Yep, your loss.
Two biggest winners that I want to now talk about, and I feel like we're saying this more and more consistently, but Alpine and Mercedes.
Yep.
And for very different ways. Mercedes they're so good at capitalizing on the misfortune of others. I think George Russell had a little bit of hindrance because of the 5-second time penalty. And they got in their way a little bit, with both of them crashing out in Q3. So they made their weekend harder than it needed to be. But Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez didn't finish the race. And you know what? They were right there to pick up the pieces, with Lewis Hamilton getting his 3rd podium in a row. Mm-hmm. So he has done his first hat trick of the season with 3 podiums in a row. And yeah, just they're such a well-oiled machine that they're always there to pick up the pieces. And they have been all season. They literally have been there all season. And I have to say, same with Alpine. I mentioned it last time. They have become the stars of the midfield, and they're always great. Double points finishes are becoming more and more regular for them. And I really do think that they are the fastest midfield team right now in terms of race pace, maybe not necessarily in qualifying pace, but in terms of race pace, that it's them and Haas are right at the front right now in terms of the midfield. And I think if both of those teams continue on the trajectory that they're on, this is going to be a very spicy battle for top of the midfield between those two teams. Yep. And I think Haas is a little bit on the back foot in terms of that battle, just because it's taken so long for Mick to get into the points. But both teams have had a couple weekends where they've walked away with double points finishes. And both teams are just kind of look like they're starting to hit their stride, which this is the perfect point of the season to be hitting their stride, because it's right. We're officially halfway through the season. It's downhill from here, and it is flat out until the finish line, especially considering over the summer, we're going to have several triple headers before and after the summer break. So both of those teams are in a really good position, but I have to give a shout out to Alpine. I think them and Haas are becoming my favorite midfield teams right now, because they're on it and they're so good.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely agree. All righty. Well, that's our biggest winners and biggest losers of the week. Our last segment that we will take a look at is our hot takes, our piping hot, spicy hot takes of the week. And I will start off. So I talked earlier about, the situation with the fans the whole fan situation. And part of what I was talking about and how this would relate to my hot take is it goes along with, talking about people being, verbally abusive and all that kind of stuff. Very much goes hand in hand with people cheering when drivers crash. Let's talk about that for a second.
Oh, it's so annoying.
And there's so many people that are pointing fingers at each other, but you have people, because most of the fans there were part of the Orange Army, cheering when Lewis crashed in Q3,
which he was going so fast. It was so dangerous.
He was going so fast, but those are the same people who were calling out Team LH when they cheered when Max Verstappen was sent to the hospital in Silverstone by Lewis. So whether it's your driver or your rival's driver or whoever, don't cheer when someone crashes. And that also goes hand in hand. We saw when Sergio Perez was punted off the track by George Russell, pretty much everyone in the comments on Twitter or on Instagram too, was saying that Checo deserved it. And I wholeheartedly disagree with every single one of those comments.
Yeah.
The only time I'm sorry, I'm getting heated. The only time it is acceptable to cheer when a driver crashes is when they get out of the car.
Yep.
That is the only time it is acceptable to cheer. When you see the driver, like when Romain Grosjean, in his crash in 2020, everyone cheered when we saw that he was out of the car. And I could point to a whole bunch of different examples, but that is the only time it's acceptable to cheer.
Yes.
And if you were one of those people that it was like, yeah, Lewis crashed, you suck. If you were one of those people that were like, yeah, Lewis punted Max off into and Cop's corner, you suck as well. No one should be cheering for drivers when they crash.
Yep.
Unless they get out of the car. Once they get out of the car, then you can cheer.
Yeah. As a sign of like, wow, he's okay.
Yeah, he's okay. Yeah. The driver is okay. And that goes past good sportsmanship. That's just being a decent human being.
Yeah, it is.
That's just being a decent human being. So that's my hot take.
Just to respond to that, I've said this, obviously ever since Liberty Media has taken over Formula One, their biggest mission has been to bring more fans into the fold. And that has been the most evident from Drive to Survive. And ever since then, I've always said this about Formula One, but now that I've gotten older and much more mature and I've grown up with Formula One my whole life, I've always said Formula One is for everyone. Mm-hmm. And that goes for anything that you enjoy. If you enjoy it, do it. Just let people enjoy things. Mm-hmm. Formula One is for everyone. And when people act certain ways at the race, it's just not fun. It's not fun to watch. It makes Formula One not fun. And this is every single little fan base of drivers and teams is guilty of it. I myself, I will say when Ferrari and McLaren or Ferrari and Renault in the early 2000s were in the heat of the battle, when misfortune happens to another team, that's good. Like as a Ferrari fan, when Michael Schumacher was racing and, Kimi Räikkönen in the McLaren or Fernando Alonso in the Renault didn't finish a race or, was beaten, that was great. But when they crash, it's a completely different thing because you have no idea the condition of that driver. And it's also just like, you're being so stupid, absolutely ridiculous. Every single fan, I myself have been guilty of it in the past. and so I'm calling myself out on this, but everybody needs to kind of take a step back and reevaluate not how they're reacting to things, but why they're involved in Formula One in the first place. And if you're involved to watch people crash and that makes you excited about Formula One, please stay away. Like that, I don't want you around the sport. And not to gatekeep Formula One from anybody, but like, we're all here to have a good time. We're here to watch the drivers do these mammoth feats of humanity by driving these cars as fast as they are, literally the 20 fastest drivers in the world. We're all here to have a good time. And, you know, for a lot of people, like, you know, British fans love McLaren because it's a national team. French fans love Alpine because it's a national team. Italian fans love Ferrari because it's a national team. There's so much more at stake in people's fandoms. Just let people enjoy it. Sorry, I could also go on forever. My hot take, real quick to wrap us up, is driving standards across the sport have been just abysmal. And top down. We saw this in Formula 2, especially the British Grand Prix, but Formula 1. And the crazy thing is, as bad as the driving standards are, it has nothing to do with the drivers. It's the drivers have been allowed for a very long time to get away with things that they shouldn't be because of inconsistent and poor marshaling. That was, you know, the takeaway that I had from the race, specifically about track limits at the Austrian Grand Prix. It's a wider issue. And this is that issue, that there is something fundamentally wrong with the way that Formula One is being marshaled. And I said this after 2021, and I'm saying it again, just complete clear slate, wipe everything, precedents, gentlemen's agreements, everything, wipe it and start over, because it is ridiculous. You know, and I think it came to a head when in the British Grand Prix weekend, when in F2, Roy Nissany was nudged Dennis Hauger off the road, and he hit a sausage curb and launched into Roy Nissany's car, and had the halo not been there, literally would have seriously injured, or worse, Roy Nissany. But that was, Roy Nissany did that. Like he was the one that shoved him off the track. Yuki Tsunoda shoved Fernando Alonso off the track, and Fernando drove by and gave him a little bit of a finger wag. You know, for as long as I can remember in the sport, going all the way back to the early 2000s, like 2002, 2003, when we first started watching, you know, it was always very consistent. There was long-standing agreements, long-standing consistency in the marshaling. And maybe we were just young and naive back then, but I remember it being, this is the way things were done. And that's why I think you see older drivers like Fernando, like Lewis and Seb, be much more outspoken about things like driving standards and the stewarding, because they come from a pedigree that is very old school in that way. And I think the FIA has completely lost control of how drivers all throughout the series are behaving. I think the only series where it's not a problem is the W series, because those girls can drive so well, and they're so fast, and they're so talented. That's literally the only series where it's not a problem. And I think just the FIA has completely lost control, and they need to do something, and they need to do something fast.
Yep. I agree. That's a good one.
Yeah.
So with that, be sure to, as always, like and subscribe at Formula1_bros. Give us a like, hit that follow button, smash that subscribe button, leave a comment. We talk about a lot of things on these podcasts. If there's ever something that you agree with or don't agree with, or just want to add something to, please leave a comment. Be sure to share with your friends. Follow us on all of our social medias, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, especially, and Spotify as well. Be sure to like and subscribe. And we'll have more content for you here shortly.
Yeah, we'll be back next week with some news all from around the world of Formula One. So in the meantime, let us know what you think, and be sure to like and subscribe.
All right. That is our episode.